in her native tongue, she would probably say, "You can't get that from here," because she's a maniac. You all know what a maniac is? Well, my wife is a masshole, meaning she's from Massachusetts. Proud to be a masshole. That's a nickname New Yorkers gave them. Maniacs are people from Maine. Kirsten Mitchell embodies everything you would want to know about Maine. The simplicity of the people, the love of the land, the love of children, and most of all, the love of stories. Kirsten Mitchell, come on up.
See, I'm going to move this so I don't trip over it. Have I got my mic turned on? Can y'all hear me? Okay.
No, you're going to need that mic.
No, I've
No,
got,
that's for the video. That's for the.
oh, I have this one too. I've got it. Can you, am I okay? I've got, it's green.
Kirsten,
Okay.
that's for the video. This is for the audience.
Right, I have the, that.
Oh, okay.
I've got the other one. I move around too much. If I tried to do that one, I'd probably fall off the stage. So I have a little bit of a different tale, and this is the first time I've told it this way. So I'm hoping that y'all will enjoy this new telling of this story. Okay? There we go. Yeah, I can hear me on. Long, long ago, and far, far away, a lonely fisherman was rowing his little boat out farther in the North Sea than he had ever been before, out farther than anyone he knew, any of the fishermen from his little village had ever been before. And he had started off that morning at dawn, threw his nets into the water, pulled them up, empty. Threw his nets into the water, pulled them up, empty. And so it went all day long, and now he was rowing towards the east, and he could see the sun going down, and he decided it was probably about time for him to turn around and go home, hungry, fishless. So he pulled the boat around and saw that the huge orange full moon was just starting to come up over the ocean, and he heard singing, ethereal, harmonious, beckoning song. So he turned back around and he started rowing back towards the moon, using the song getting louder as his guide. And finally, the song was very loud, and he felt the boat stop and turned around, and he was on an island. He was on an island, and now the moon was behind a huge boulder, and it seemed to be that the singing was coming from the other side of that boulder. So he walked toward the boulder and tripped over something, bent down and picked it up. It was a fir. It was a fir, and even in the shadow cast by the boulder, he could tell it was mostly black and had a white stripe on it. Well, he held it, and he walked to the boulder and peered behind it, and he saw luminous in the moonlight, as graceful as swans, as playful as otters, women dancing, and they were singing. The moonlight glowed on their heads, on their long flowing hair, on their arms, on their breasts and their bellies. And he was transfixed and watched and realized what he was holding was a sealskin, and these were selkies. They were seals in the water, and they were women on the land. And the most glorious one of all, the one who was dancing with the most abandon and laughing and singing with the most beautiful hypnotic voice was a tall woman with long black hair and a white stripe. Well, he held on to that pelt and he watched the women dancing until he heard a noise behind him, and he turned around and the tide was coming up and his boat was about to be taken off. So he went back and got in the boat and rowed out a little way from the island, tucked the pelt into his fisherman's sweater and all around him, and kind of, tried to disguise that it was in there. And he waited until he saw the moon come up even higher and the tide come up higher. And the only thing left above the water was the top of that big boulder that he had been peeking around. And silhouetted on that boulder was that woman that he wanted. Around in the water were seals, and they were crying this mournful, mournful cry. And the woman on the rock was crying so hard, he thought it looked like her heart was breaking. He rowed his boat back over to the rock. At this point, she could easily have gotten in, and he held out his hand. And she looked around at the mournful seals, and she looked at the sky, and she looked at the endless ocean all around them, and she held out her hand and let him help her into the boat. There was a time in my life when I felt just as bereft and in need of rescue as that Selkie woman. I had held my mother's hand as she took her last few breaths. And when she was gone, the heart of the house I had grown up in was gone, and it didn't feel like home anymore. In trying to find my home, I went to California with my college roommate, and there, the eucalyptus trees shaded the sidewalks, and the hollies, the size of a maple in New England, lost their thorny, sharp leaves all over the ground. It didn't feel like home. I went back across the country, back to Maine, but not to the little coastal fishing village where I had grown up, but hundreds of miles north, inland on the Canadian border. And I was in an August wedding, wearing hand-sewn prairie dresses. We carried bouquets of wildflowers and walked across a meadow at dawn, singing, "Long live God, long live God, long live God, long live God." And my college roommate came and kissed her Prince Charming, and they went off to create their home and begin their happily ever after. It got cold quick that year. By February, the mountains of snow beside the plowed parking lots towered over the buildings beside them. And the back roads were tunnels through the snow, and the only view was the gray sky up above. By April, the snow was still on the ground, but it was kind of low and rotten. Snow gets rotten and dirty, and nobody smiled. And that place didn't feel like home. So I rented a cabin in my hometown. It had a hand pump in the sink that I had to use to fill up a kettle of water to heat on the stove, to take a bath in the clawfoot tub. And it had a very friendly double-seated outhouse with a solid wooden wall facing the road and a glass window wall looking down the field to the river. And in that field, wild strawberries got ripe that summer. And they're like tiny little things. And it takes an hour to pick a little bowl of them. But when you eat one, it explodes in your mouth like the sweetest essence of summer. I was going one way down the main street in my hometown when I saw a really nice-looking man hitchhiking up the other side. He had a big backpack on, he had broad shoulders, and he had big, bushy, reddish, blonde hair. And I yelled at him, "Where are you coming from?" And he said, "North Carolina." Well, he used those broad shoulders to hand cut with a scythe enough room in that field behind my house that we could put out some metal folding chairs and invite some friends and family over. And I had my own August wedding. I wore a simple, long blue dress that my sister-in-law made, and after the ceremony where we just said our own vows, she served blueberry pancakes to the guests. Well, we took off hitchhiking on our honeymoon up across Canada, down through Niagara Falls. How stereotypical is that? And on Labor Day weekend, we arrived in Asheville, and I started to make my new home. It was a tiny little trailer, perched in a park on a scar on the mountain, with a view of Mount Pisgah and the essence of the Canton paper mill. It didn't really feel like home. And just a month later, I found out I was pregnant. My husband told me I could have an abortion or a divorce. And that was how I found myself in Asheville, pregnant, feeling very, very vulnerable when I met Jim Mitchell. He was with me when the baby was born. He wanted me to marry him. There were some red flags, but I felt as bereft and as in need of rescue as the selkie on the rock. Well, she got back into the fisherman's boat, and he started rowing back to his little fishing village, and he threw in his nets, and he pulled them out full of fish. And before he threw it down in the bottom of the boat, he reached for the oil skin that he kept down there all the time in case of rain, and he wrapped it around the woman to cover up her nakedness. And he kept rowing towards his island, and he kept throwing the net in, and the net kept coming up full of fish. By the time he got to his village, it was overflowing, and they were floating like down around the gunnels in the water because it was so heavy. And every day after that, when he went out, he had all the fish his boat could carry. He and the selkie got married. They had 2 children. And from all the money he generated with all those fish, he was able to build him a nice house up on the hill overlooking the village. Looked down on the village one way, and it was close to a path on the other side where the selkie would often go and stand at the top of the cliff and look out over the ocean. Often she would see the heads of seals. Sometimes they would be beached on rocks at low tide, and one great seal would often come up and call to her. in the seal's language. But as time went on, she had 2 children, a little boy, a little girl, and the fisherman loved her dearly. But she was not thriving. Her long, dark hair got brittle and started to fall out. Her skin that was so plump and juicy dried and was hanging off of the bones. Her eyes that were so bright and eager became dull. The fisherman saw what was happening with his wife, and he knew he probably needed to do something about it. I don't think Jim Mitchell really saw what was happening with me. We moved into a little house that we were able to buy from a small inheritance I had from my grandfather. 18 months after my oldest son was born, my second son was born, the third one 15 months after that, and my daughter in 2 years. Jim worked in a mill, and he was a good worker. He went to work every day, but he came home and drank. And he drank until he passed out every night. And I was so far from family. I had no help with the children. I hadn't had a good night's sleep in years and years. It was really miserable for me. And I don't think Jimmy even saw. But the fisherman did. And one night, when after his wife had put the children to bed and was looking outside, she saw her husband stop at this area right next to the path. And he was kneeling, and it looked like he was praying, and it looked like he was crying. And she watched him there until he got up and kind of wiped his eyes and beseeched the heaven, and then walked down towards the village where he often had a pint with his friends. Well, she waited until he was out of sight, and then she went and she stood in that exact spot, and she breathed in, and she smelled the sea. She smelled family. She smelled home. She went back to the house, she got a shovel, she started digging, and she dug until she had to jump into the hole to keep digging, and she dug and she hit something hard, and she reached down and she pulled out a wooden box and put it on the edge of the hole and opened it up, and there, wrapped in oilskin, was her pelt. Oh. She looked back at the house. She thought of her children sleeping there and how much she loved them and how she didn't want to leave them. But what good would she be to those children if she was dead and she knew she was dying? She carried the pelt down that path to the top of the cliff where she could look down and see the beach where all the fishing boats were lined up. And if you had been down on that beach looking up at the cliff, you would have seen a woman jumping off that high cliff and going down, down, down into the water. And you would have seen the head of a seal bobbing back up, a black head with a white stripe. My transformation took a little more time. I started going to Al-Anon, and I figured out how to live with an alcoholic without losing my peace. When the kids got old enough to go to school, I went back to school, and I finished the degree that I had started before my mother got so sick. I created a career for myself where I helped people, and I brought our family up out of poverty. And it, stitch by stitch and hair by hair, I created my own pelt. And when it was time for me to leave, after 25 years, I left with great sadness because I did love that man. But you know when it's time to go. The Selkie woman loved her fisherman husband too. And when the children woke up the next morning and looked through the house, they didn't see their mother anywhere. They finally went outside and they saw their father sitting on the edge of a big hole, crying as though his heart would break. Even though they never saw their human mother again. As they get older and became fishers themselves and went out in their boats, every time they threw their net in, it came back full. And if they looked around the boat, somewhere close would be the head of a seal, black with a white stripe. Thank you.
So good. So good. Come on down. Come on down. Kirsten Mitchell, everybody, is